All right. So, in our class, there's one thing I've just decided that we are going to be doing, and that's using this free code camp to learn, right? This free code camp has like lessons for everything we need to learn when it comes to front end development. Everything we need to learn when it comes to front end development, you will find it in this free code camp. So we have the HTML, we have CSS, we have JavaScript, and we have front end libraries. And the way that we are going to be doing this class, everyone will create an account on freeCodeCamp and we'll go through the courses on their own. And then each time that we have a class, we're just going to pick out one particular topic first to teach. Like maybe we would say today we are going to look at design. And when we are looking at design, everybody will come so that we look at that design together. If you've already got into this design in your own, that's in your own free code camp, then that's fine. It will serve as a recap for you. But if you haven't got into design, then you can just try to see if you can participate in the class. And then since the call is going to be recorded, you will you will go and see the recording much later. So that's how we are going to be doing it. So give me a second. Give me a second. All right. All right. There's nobody here. Let's continue. Okay. So Um, please, Dubem, can you remind me what we talked about in our previous class? What did we learn about in the previous class? You can just type it in the income message if you don't want to unmute your mic. Alright, so Dubem said we learned arrow function, and that's correct. We actually looked at arrow function in the previous class here, under JavaScript functions. And I told you guys to complete this lecture and start working on this calculator workshop, right? But the people in this class currently, I don't know. Okay, I think we can work on the calculator workshop together now, right? If you want us to work on the calculator workshop together, just do a thumbs up. Do a thumbs up if you're ready to work on the calculator workshop together. How come I'm the only person doing a thumbs up? Okay. Um. All right. Isn't wants us to do it as well? That's nice. Let me add some more people to the call. Please, if you're hearing any background noise, just ignore it. It's coming from these children. Please close that window. All right. Okay, please also mute your mic while you're on the call. Thank you very much. I'm on a call. All right. Um, I think we are ready to continue. So I'm using only one screen. So let's start the project. Let's start the calculator project. Let's start the calculator project. So in this calculator project, I believe we are going to be using both named functions and arrow functions. And this area is going to be where we are going to see the instructions. And when we type in what is required of us, we'll see our output here. So that's actually pretty nice. Um, and that's how free code camp is from beginning to end. So whenever you want to practice on free code camp, what you just need to do is read out the instructions for each of the steps, and then once you understand the instructions and you type the correct thing, you can just click on check your code to move on to the next level. So let's look at the first step here. It says in this workshop you will review how to work with functions by building a calculator app. So in the previous lectures, you learned how to declare functions like this using the function keyword, and then the function name to create a regular function. So based on the previous classes we've been having, I think everybody understands now that if you want to create a function, you start by mentioning the function keyword, right? And then you now set the function name, put this parenthesis, and then the code block here in curly brackets. And then if you want to create an arrow function, you create a variable, right, that will bear the function name. And then what you assign to it is the a bracket, that's a parenthesis with an arrow symbol here, and then the code block. So that's the key difference between the regular function and the arrow function. In the regular function you have the function keyword, but in the arrow function there's no function keyword. However, there's an arrow symbol. Okay, so now the instruction here is, they said start by creating a function called add 2 and 7. We can choose to use the regular function syntax, or we can use the arrow function syntax. Now, if you're using the regular function syntax, what you would do is to put the function keyword, right? So you type in the function keyword, and then you now type in the function name, add 2 and 7. So add 2 and 7. Then you put the parenthesis, and then you put the code block. So if you do it like this, it should work. At this point, we are not really adding anything to the function, right? We are just creating the function. Now, there's something I want to bring to your attention. This function that we just created like this is using the regular function syntax, right? If you want to create it as an arrow function, what we probably need to do is something like this. If we do const, then we put the function name add 2 and 7, and then put the assignment operator, because now we are assigning the arrow function to this variable that we just created, right? Then you now come and put the parentheses, and then put the arrow, and then put the code block. So this is one of the key difference between creating an arrow function and a regular function. Another thing that you will notice is the way the function name looks, right? We have this add, which is the first word here. All of it is in small letters, and then for each subsequent word in the name, the first letter is a capital letter. This method is known as the camel case method now, and you would see it when you start creating variables. So it works for creating variables. It also works for creating functions. You can use it in any scenario that has to do with naming, this camel case. So keep that in mind. So by the way, we are going to use this one. You also notice that in the output here, we are having this error, a syntax error, right? That says that the identifier add27 has already been declared here. So here we declared it as a function here, and we are trying to now declare it as another function. So what does this mean? When you create a function with this function name, right? Be careful not to try to declare it again as maybe as a different function or as a variable. It's almost the same thing with creating variables. When you create a variable, of course, there's no need to come and start creating that variable again using that exact same name. So keep that in mind. Alright, so let me clean up this one and let's check our code. And then, so let's check the code. So we can see that the code is correct. Let's go to the next one. Please, if as I am explaining this thing, you have any questions you want to ask me, right? Just indicate by raising up your hand. I will give you the opportunity to unmute your mic and speak, and then ask your question. Or you can also drop the question in the in-call message. Okay, we already have our question. Divine, do you want to ask a question, or you are just testing it out? All right. If you want to ask a question, just go ahead and ask, Sha. But let's move on to the step two here. Step two says one of the concepts that we've learned in the previous lectures was how to return the values from a function. Now, we know that this is how you create a function in JavaScript. You mention the function keyword, and then you put the function name, and then you put the parentheses and the code block. Now, when you create a function like this, if you don't put this return statement there, let's say you put something else in the code block, the function is still going to run, but the return statement is going to say undefined because you did not actually define it. You didn't add any kind of value to it. Do you understand? It's going to say undefined. But if you want to return a value from that function, that's the value that you want as your output after you have finished running the function. That's what the return statement is going to help you return, right? If you want to return the value from this function, you use a return statement and then you now put that value, the value that you want to get out of the function. What that will do now is that whenever you run this function, eh, after the function has finished running, the output of that function is what's going to be in that return statement. So here they are saying that inside your add 2 and 7 function, which is this one that we just created here, return the sum of 2 and 7. So I'm going to put a return statement here and then I'll say 2 plus 7 because that's the sum of 2 and 7. 2 plus 7. So if you do it like this, it will work, right? I think it will work. But you can also, there are also other methods you can use for it. You can decide to create a variable. So I can decide to do something like this. Um, const sum equal to 2 plus 7. I can decide to do something like this and then I will now return sum. So what I'm doing here essentially is that I am creating a variable here, sum, and I'm first running the this thing, the operation that I want to run. That's 2 plus 7 to give us the answer 9. So that means what's going to be inside here now will be 9 after this 2 plus 7 has run. And then when we are returning the value of sum here, which is 9. So you can do it like this, or you can decide to do it directly like we just did the last time. Any of them that you do is fine. There are use case scenarios for each one, right? There are some scenarios like this particular use case now. If we do it like this, there's no problem. But in another use case scenario, something like the one that would require doing some kind of other more complex computations, then you might need to create variables and do all of those other stuff. But that's fine for now. Um, let's move on to the next one. Let's check the code and move on to the next one. By the way, if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, right, you can just go and click on. Let me. I think I will share the link. So I'm currently in step 3. Let me share the link to the in-call message, and then you guys can join in from there. Okay, so check the in-call message. You should see the link that I've shared. Give me a second. I'm coming. All right. All right. Let's continue. Let me add someone to the call. Jeffy. Oopsie. What is it? I think it's this one. Yeah. Okay. So let's continue. So in step 3 says in the previous lectures you learned how to call or invoke a function. Calling a function means to execute the code inside that function. Now, here's a reminder of how to call a function. So, all of these things are just like a reminder for the lesson that we are doing. That's to build the calculator app. But of course, if you want to actually go through this lesson on your own, right? Just check the previous lecture. That's the lecture before this particular workshop. Check that previous lecture on functions, and you will see what they did here. Okay, so let me add someone else to the call. Wisdom. Okay, please, if you're joining the call, kindly mute your mic so that it doesn't distract us. All right, so in step 3 it says in the previous lectures you learned how to call or to invoke a function, right? So here's a reminder of how to invoke a function. And by the way, calling a function means to execute the code that is inside that function. So to execute this code that is inside this function, you have to call it. Here, what you're doing here is that you're declaring the function. That's whenever you create a function like this, you are essentially declaring that function, but you have not yet actually invoked it. So the function will be there, but it will not be in use. If you have some experience with variables, you also know that the same thing happens with variables. You can create a variable using either the let keyword or the const keyword or the var keyword. But creating the variable doesn't mean that that variable is active. It just means that you've created it, right? If you want to actually use the variable, you have to now implement it where you want to do it. And that's the same thing with functions. With functions, when you use the function keyword or when you create an arrow function, the function there has been declared, but you have not yet invoked it. You have not yet called it. So to call the function is just you mention the function name and you put the parenthesis in front of it. That way you invoke the function, right? So um, they said here add a console.log statement and inside it call the add27 function. You should now see the sum of 2 and 7 logged in the console. So if you look at this line 1 to 3 at the top here, you notice that we have the function. We've already declared the function and we've given it a return statement, right? But we have not yet invoked the function. So what they're essentially telling us to do is that we should create a console.log statement first. So let's do it. We'll do console.log on that line 4. You type console.log and then put the brackets after the console.log, and then you will now call this add27 function inside the console.log. So I'll type where add 2 and 7, and then put the brackets for the function. So be, like I want you to take very good note of what is happening here. The console.log itself has its own parenthesis, as you can see, right? And then within the parenthesis of this console.log, we are invoking this function, the add27 function. And remember that if you're invoking a function, if you're calling a function, you should also put the parenthesis there. So that's the only way that it's going to work. You can already see that the output is showing up as 9. So you guys should keep that in mind whenever you're invoking a function. Make sure that you put the parenthesis after the function. There are some scenarios where you would even need to add something inside the parenthesis. That's add a parameter into the parenthesis. So just don't forget to put the parenthesis in the first place. All right. So that's it. Okay. So give me a second. I'll be back shortly. Okay, so let's continue. All right, let's move on to the next challenge, step 4. So, step 4 here says that now it's time to add another function. So, we've added the first function here, right? Add 2 and 7. And we have the return statement 2 plus 7, which when we do a console.log add 2 7, we are getting the response 9. So, this one nice, correct and complete. So for step 4, it says let's add another function, right? So we are going to declare a function called add 3 and 4. And that function is going to return the sum of 3 and 4. You can see that all these steps are kind of like very straightforward and easy to follow. So we're just going to do. Okay, they also said we should call the add 3 and 4 function inside a console.log to see the results. So let's first create the function. This time around, we use the regular function here for this one, but let's try using an arrow function. So I want to demonstrate something with an arrow function. So of course, to create an arrow function, you first create a variable. So the variable is going to be add 3 and 4, and then that variable we are going to assign the arrow function to it. So you first put the parentheses, put the arrow symbol, and now since I want to do the entire arrow function in one line, right, I don't actually need to put the brackets. That's one cool thing about arrow functions. So what I can just do here is 3 plus 4 and it will work, right? So that's one of the cool things about arrow functions. But like I said, just with the return statement and using variables within a regular function and all of those other things I mentioned earlier, right? It all boils down to personal preference and what you're trying to achieve, right? So there's no better, like there's no this one is better than this one. Although there are some scenarios where you might say one is better than the other, but it's not all the time. It's subjective, so to speak. Okay, so we've created the function here. Now we are going to do the console.log, and then in the brackets we'll have add 3 and 4, and then put the parenthesis for it. And we can see that it is already giving us our output 7. So 3 plus 4 is 7. So that's correct. We check the code. We can see that the code is actually correct as well. So let's move on to the next one, step 5. Step 5 says even though the functions work as expected, there is a lot of repetition in your code. Since you're building a calculator, you don't want to have to create a function for every possible combination of numbers you want to add together. So this is a calculator project you're working on, of course. And if you come and start creating functions like this, where you have this one 2 plus 7, and then you have this one 3 plus 4, you're not really going to be. That means for every possible use case that somebody is going to have in a calculator, you would have to create a separate function for it, which is not very sustainable, as you can already tell. So um, it would be better to create a single reusable function that can add any two numbers together. So we are going to remove all the code that we've written so far, which that's what we are going to do here right now, right? And then in the next step, we will review how working with parameters. Okay, review how to work with parameters and arguments in functions. So if you followed the previous lecture, there was a part where they talked about parameters and arguments, right? Of course, in the next couple of steps, they are going to touch on it, right? But I think it still be nice to just give a quick reminder of what it is. So essentially, a parameter is basically a set of values that you can put here. So let's say we are supposed to add two numbers. So I'm just going to say add two nums here as this function, right? I can come and put a and b as the parameters. So that's what they are called, the parameters of the function. That's the two numbers, a placeholder for those two numbers. And then I can then come here and put a and b. So what this essentially means is that whatever two numbers I put here, this add two numbers function is going to give me the sum of those two numbers. That's it, to return the sum of those two numbers. So if I try to put it here, let's say I do add two nums, right? That's I'm trying to like invoke the add two nums function I just created. And then I can put any two sets of numbers there. So I can put 4 as the first number and put 7 as the second number, you will see that it will give us the output 11 here, right? If I put, let's say, 13 here now as a second number, you see it will give us a better, another output. So that's essentially what a parameter is. At this point where it is here, these are the parameters, and then these are the arguments. Arguments are values that you're going to use to replace those parameters when you are ready to invoke the function. So in the next couple of steps, we're going to look at those things in more details, but I just feel like I should give you guys a quick overview of what we are going to be looking at. So they said we should actually remove all the code here. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll delete all the code, then check my code, and then move on to the next challenge. And in the next challenge, it says, in the previous lectures, you learned how to work with function parameters. That's in the lectures before this, which I would still advise that you go and look at if you don't fully understand it yet. Just go back to the lectures and look at them to help you make more sense of this. So it says, a function parameter is a variable that is defined in the function's declaration and acts as a placeholder. So here is an example of a function that has a parameter. So here you have a parameter name, right? The parameter here in the function is name, and then we are using it as a variable to define the function's declaration, right? So put it here as a variable. The function here is greet user, parameter is name, and then we are using the parameter inside the function. So here they are asking us to declare a function called calculate sum that takes two parameters in. The first parameter is going to take is the num1 parameter, and then the num2 parameter. Okay, so this is 133, num1 parameter and num2 parameter. So let's create the function. Guys, I think we should do a little vote here in the class. If you want us to use the arrow function, type arrow in the in-call message. And if you want us to use the regular function, type regular in the in-call message. So let me see how many responses we are going to get. If you want us to use the arrow function to create it, type arrow. If you want us to use the regular function, type regular. Okay. So we have one vote for arrow here. Yes, please, we don't have much time. The vote will be ending in 1 minute, in 1 minute by 1:35. Only one vote. Okay, so we have two votes now for arrow. Three votes. Wow, interesting. So a lot of you guys want us to use arrow. Yes, we still have more time, guys. Nobody wants to use regular. Okay, four votes for arrow. Okay, let's get one more vote for arrow. Or should we add my vote? Okay, so everybody has chosen. Most people have chosen arrow. So we are going to use the arrow. So, so of course, to create an arrow function, how you do it is you put the create it as a variable first. So put the variable declaration there, and then that's the variable keyword there. Then put the function name. Then assign it. That you put the assignment operator. Then since it is going to take in two parameters, remember that when you are creating an arrow function, you first put the parenthesis, then put the arrow symbol, and then you can decide to put the curly brackets if you are going to put maybe a return statement afterwards or something. But since we don't need the return statement, right, this is what we're just going to do. Okay, you know what, fine, let's use the return statement so that it is not that confusing from how it looks here, right? So of course, after putting the arrow, put the curly brackets, then the return statement. Now, of course, where are we going to put the parameters? We are going to put it inside this parenthesis here. So the first parameter is num1, the second parameter is num2. One key thing to keep in mind about parameters is that they are always going to be separated by a comma, right? So for each subsequent parameter you want to put, if I want to put three numbers, I can put a num3, but I'll have to put the comma first before putting the next parameter. So keep that in mind. Then, of course, what we are doing is adding both parameters, so num1 plus num2. And I think we've done it. We've declared a function that takes into parameters. But we actually did more than we needed to do. So let's see if this will still work. Okay, it still works. All right, let's go on to the next one. Submit and go to the next challenge. All right, so you see that it's even though we created it with an arrow function, in the next step it's moving to a regular function. But don't worry, that's just the platform. That's just free code camp for you. Of course, when you're writing your code, the one that you intend to use is the one that is going to be there. Garbage in, garbage out. Anyway, so step 7 says inside your calculate sum function, you will need to return the sum of the two parameters. Now, we already did this in the previous one with the arrow function. So let's go ahead and just do it with this one. So we'll just click on the return statement and then put num1, which is the first parameter, and then num2, which is the second parameter. You will also notice that at the end of each statement that I write in my JavaScript, I used to put this semicolon at the end. This semicolon is what you use to indicate that you've ended a JavaScript statement, right? Now, JavaScript makes this semicolon optional for most use cases, and of course, depending on the people that you're working with, it might also be optional. But generally, it's a good idea to put the appropriate semicolon, right? When you are writing your code, so that you can also be able to distinguish where one statement ends and where another one starts. So keep that in mind. Step 8 says that the advantage of functions is that they can be called with different arguments, allowing you to reuse the same code with various values. If you remember that example that I gave earlier, I said when you create a when you create a function, right? Like that add two sums function that we created earlier. Let me even do it again. So let's say the function. We created a function and they said add two numbers, and then the two numbers we have the parameters one, that's a and b, and then the return statement is going to say um, a plus b. Because we are using parameters instead of actual values here, what this means is that change the value we can actually change whatever argument we want to add. So we can say add two numbers and then we use 1 and 3, or we use 5 and 6, or we use 3 and 4, or we use 20 and 500, whatever, right? And we can also do that, like that thing works for all the functions. So look at this function that they gave us here. This is the greet user function. It has a parameter name, and then what it is doing is going to run a console.log, which will give us hello name. So whatever name that we put here is going to show up in our console. There's browser console, or in the terminal, wherever you're running the JavaScript there. And you can see here that when we call the function the first time, we use John as the argument. So John is what is replacing this name parameter here as this place. And then the output that we will get is hello John, right? And then when we use another argument here, Jane, instead of John, what we'll get as the output is what? Hello Jane, right? So that's how you use a parameter and argument. When you put a parameter, you can put different arguments and get different results. So here they said add a console.log that calls the calculate sum function with the arguments 2 and 5. Now, if you recall, you will know that the calculate sum function at the top here takes in two parameters, the num1 and the num2 parameter, and then returns the sum of both of them, right? So whatever we put as the arguments here and here will return the sum. And we are going to do, they said add the console.log first, so put the console.log, and then we'll now call the calculate sum function, calculate sum, put the parentheses for it, and then put in the two arguments 2 and 5, and then click on check code. You see that is actually correct because it's giving us the output. All right, let me add someone to the call. Who is joining the call? Annie Best Media. Are they gone? Okay, so our call will be ending in about 20 minutes. Anyway, with time we'll start doing premium so that we can do some more interesting things with our meetings. Okay, let's go to the next challenge. Step 9. Step 9 says To further test out your calculate sum function, you will need to call it with different arguments. When we get to step 10, we are going to take a little break, and then we are just going to have like some kind of discussion. If there's any question anybody wants to ask me, or if there's anything they would like us to talk about, maybe in our next lesson, something that they've been working on, right? You can always talk about it, and then we'll see what we can do about it. Okay. So here, step 9 says to further test out your calculate sum function, you will need to call it with different arguments. So we are going to add another console.log. We already have the first one here, but we're going to add a second one that calls the calculate sum function with the arguments 10 and 10. And then we'll add another one that calls the arguments 5 and 5. So 10 plus 10 is 20, 5 plus 5 is 10, which means our output is supposed to give us 7, 20, and 10. So let's start with the first one. So we'll put the console.log, and then we'll call calculate sum brackets 10 for the first argument, 10 for the second argument, and then you see that we're already getting the output 20. Console.log again, calculate sum 5 and 5, and we'll see that we are getting 10 as the output, and that's correct. All right, final one, step 10. So now that the calculator can add two numbers together, it's time to create a function that will subtract two numbers together. So we're going to create a different function here, calculate difference, that will take in two parameters, num1 and num2. And then inside the function, we will return the difference between those two parameters. So how do we create this function? Same way, we use the function keyword because we are going to make it a regular function. And then we are going to do calculate difference, put the brackets, then put the parameters num1 and num2. Now, remember that this is difference, so it's going to be difference. It's going to subtract two numbers, so we are going to return and do num1 minus num2, and that's exactly the same thing that you will do when you start working on your own. And then when we click on this, it should give us the answer. Alright, so I think at this point we can take a pause to the lesson. We can take a pause to the lesson and then try to let's get some feedback. So guys, let's talk. Let's talk. Did you guys understand what we've been doing so far on functions? Like, is there any part that was a bit confusing for you, or is there any part that you would like me to throw more light on, or like, what's your conviction? What are you guys currently doing? Like, in fact, I think we should start by this. Like, if you're currently if you're currently on free code camp, that you've been working with your free code camp, please indicate by raising your hand. If you've been working with your free code camp, like, or you're currently on your free code camp, indicate by raising your hand. Okay, so so we have wisdom on free code camp. Okay, all right. So wisdom, just you can just text, just send me a text like where you currently are in free code camp. Like, what are you doing at the moment? What lesson are you taking on free code camp at the moment, and how is it going? You can just type it as a message in the in call message. Let's look at it. So in the meantime, while you guys are typing it, you know what? Everyone should just type because I know that everybody has been working on free code camp, right? You cannot tell me that you've not been working on free code camp. So just go ahead and type it in the in call message. Let's see. We have only about 15 minutes till the call ends. So I think, yeah, we'll soon be ending the call. So in the meantime, I've actually been reviewing our learning content. This one is from Alchemy of Code. Although we have the one from IGHub here, the one we're working with at IGHub, which is here, which is here. This one is supposed to be 12 weeks. This is 12 weeks. So yeah, this curriculum we're still working on it, but Very soon it will be complete, and once it's complete, we will be able to learn it. I feel like this curriculum is just for you guys to use on your own, like to use and learn on your own. Oh, I'm not even sharing my screen. Hold on. Okay, please do a thumbs up if you can see my screen now. I wasn't even sharing my screen. Okay, good, good. So, like I was saying, this curriculum, yeah, this is the one you guys are going to be using to learn on your own. In addition to that, free code camp. But then, the classes that we are going to have, thankfully, now that we are recording the classes, we might not need to be going back and forth with the classes, right? Whenever anybody needs to refresh their knowledge on something, they can just go and watch the recordings, or they can just follow the lessons as well. So we're just going to be covering the lessons like this in this order, like from time to time, depending on who is available in the class, and also depending on the consensus that we arrive at in the group. That's how it's just going to be moving forward. But I believe that with time we'll be able to cover everything that is here, right? And since we are recording it, you always have something to go back to and learn on your own. All right, so thank you all for joining today's class. See you guys on Thursday. I think I should still check the. Let me check the in-call message. Let me check the in-call message. Okay, so Wisdom says JavaScript fundamentals. Currently in JavaScript fundamentals and review. JavaScript fundamentals and review. Let's see. Let me share this tab. JavaScript fundamentals and review. Where is it? Oh, interesting. That's quite far. That's actually quite far. That's good. Okay. So, like, which one currently? Um, Types and objects or arrays? Which one? Which one? Just tell me here. Okay. Then. Okay. Then. Hmm? Where is it? Okay, the quiz. Okay, you're in the quiz. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So Chidubem says most times the internet cause making it harder to understand. Okay. When we resume physical classes. Okay. Okay. So okay, this is for the quiz, the JavaScript fundamentals quiz. Interesting. This one should be fun. I think everyone should attempt this one on their own. I think it will be very very fun, and even if you fail it, you can always retry it as many times as you want until you get it. So it's fun. Try it, and it's free. It's free. Then internet. Yes, I want to leave the quiz. Internet. I think that's under CSS, computer basics. Uh, okay, said internet. Most times the internet cuts, making it hard to understand. Oh man. Oh, sorry about that, Chidubim. Sorry about that. Okay. But okay, when we resume physical classes, we'll start physical classes in September. But we are also going to be combining it with online classes like this because the online classes can be recorded, but the physical classes can't be recorded yet. So, I think we'll still figure out a way to do that one later, sure. But for now, we can't record it yet. Okay, that being said, I think we can end the class here today. Please, everyone, make sure that you keep on working on your, like wherever you currently are on this Recode Camp, continue working on it. And if you have any questions, just drop it in the group. I'll answer them. So thank you so much for joining today's class. Have a nice day. Bye.